Greetings, Mr. and Mrs. Middle America and all the ships at sea. This is Ian Pundit in for George Norrie. And to the hostile invading alien armies hovering silently just behind their cloaking devices outside of Earth's atmosphere, remember, eat the Canadians first. And I wasn't even going to lead with that tonight, but since we have this story coming out of Russia that they claim to have shot down a mysterious ball-shaped UAP, I thought worthy of mentioning. Tonight there was some backstage drama I was sharing on Twitter. At Deacon Pundit is my Twitter handle. And it was about our original guest, Billy Vera, who I've been looking forward to talking to. He's a music historian as well as a songwriter and a singer, producer, actor. He was in Buckaroo Banzai, for God's sakes. I mean, he's been acting for a long time, too. But he just knows all this cool stuff about kind of the secret history of pop music. And that's what I love doing those music shows. It just sort of, you take something that you think you know. You've heard it a million times. And then you actually get down to how did something come to be? Or what did it take for something to catch on? And you realize there's so much we just don't know about the machinations in our popular culture. We'll do it again sometime. I hope he's feeling better soon. But I looked out because, as I tweeted out earlier, we had already been in conversation with Ric Prado. He is the author of this very, very successful book from the past year that I've been sort of circling around about Black Ops, the life of a CIA shadow warrior. And I've been on this spy jag lately, watching all of these shows on TV, Netflix, going to movies. I don't know why. I've just been sort of this deep dive into espionage on various levels of authenticity, right? And we'll get to that coming up with Rick, I'm sure. But I mean, I've been watching Slow Horses on Apple, which is Apple TV Plus, which is a terrific British show with Gary Oldman. And then also this kind of silly, frothy thing called The Recruit on Netflix, which is, it's Johnny Quest. It's fun. And then there's, like, in all these other shows in between it. I don't know why I can't get... Lately, I've been watching sort of Bond movies and spent some time with some of the Bond themes. And I think there's just so much there in the shadows that always gets me thinking. What don't we know? Well, and we know very little, I think, or do we? And so it's the life of a CIA shadow warrior that we'll be exploring tonight. Thank you, Ric Prado, for jumping in and giving us this opportunity on short notice. Then we'll go to open lines coming up for the rest of the night. I'm just going to do tonight, and then there's this cool show on Nazi history coming up tomorrow night on Coast to Coast, and then I'll be back again next weekend, Friday and Saturday, and I'll do the usual lineup that we do in January. But, obviously the big story. Weather's calm. People seem to be safe tonight. Some storms in California on the coast, some more snow, more rain coming. But the big story tonight is we finally have a Speaker of the House. It was settled in the last 30 minutes or so. Bottom of the 15th, before we got a winner. Team Kevin beat out the Never Kevins. The final score was 216 to 212 before Team Kevin could claim victory. And this beat the previous record for the longest such thing when the May 1st, 1920 meeting of the Brooklyn Robins and the Boston Braves went the distance. Still holds the record. Brooklyn jumped out to a 1-0 lead in the fifth inning, thanks to a leadoff walk that turned into a runner on second. And then a few moments later, Ivy Olson dropped an RBI single for the first run of the game. Then there was one in the bottom of the sixth that tied it, and so it remained. But we finally got it settled. and the Never Kevins lost, I guess, or we don't know what they gave up to win. I don't know. A lot of backdoor deals that I'm sure we'll still just be learning about. But here's what we know at the end of a very busy news week. Damar Hamlin is breathing on his own and talking. That did not seem likely somehow earlier in the week, not when he was being defibbed on the field between the Bills and the Bengals. Actor Jeremy Renner played chicken with a 7.5-ton snowplow and won. And Kevin McCarthy is Speaker of the House. And I'm not sure of those three which one is the biggest miracle. But none of those will be on discussion for tonight. Tonight it's going to be about espionage. And we're going to find out just what it is that's happening in the shadows of our nation. And on the battlefields and in the cities and in the alleyways across the world, from a guy who knows, a shadow warrior who's been there, and now he's written about it in the book Black Ops. Ric Prado is next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Ric Prado is the man that every person I know wants to be. Thanks for giving us time tonight on Coast to Coast.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it, Ian.
I'm going to read a little bit of your bio. And I stress little bit, because we could give up 15 minutes doing this. It's pretty cool. Enrique Ric Prado is a paramilitary counterterrorism and special clandestine operations specialist with a focus on international training operations and programs. A 24-year veteran of the CIA, served as an operations officer in 6 overseas posts. He was deputy chief of station and plank owner. I'm going to ask more about that. On the original Bin Laden task force. He spent his first 10 years at the CIA as a paramilitary officer. And he originally came before all of this service to our country. He was originally born in Cuba. And his native language, Spanish, has come in quite handy in your operations around the world. But you're also pretty well rated in Japanese, which is kind of cool. So a true man of the world. Thank you for your service. I'm going to try to. I will just tell you in advance, if I ask any questions that seems out of bounds, I won't be offended, and I don't mean to pry, so I'll be curious, but you don't obviously have to answer anything that you're not comfortable with or anything that might get you in trouble with the CIA.
Thank you. I appreciate that courtesy.
Let me give you 2 observations on your book cover, okay? Looking at your photo, I can just tell you smell good.
It depends what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, that's like you're a man who knows how to dress, and I would say probably you're a guy who doesn't use too much cologne, because you look like a man who appreciates style, and you understand that a man's the essence of a man shouldn't extend too much further beyond his own presence, as opposed to the guy sitting next to me at a table last night who wore like half a bottle of cologne, and it's like there was a cloud around him. It was awful. And then the other thing is, on your cover, there's a knife. And I've read enough of these books over the years that I'm always curious to see, what is that symbolic thing? Is it a silhouette image of Congress? Is there something that looks particularly something we might invoke as being kind of clandestine? Is there a gun? And on the cover of your book, Black Ops, there's a knife. Can you explain that a little better?
Yeah, I think you touched on it a little bit. There is a certain mystique to the knife. It is a weapon of stealth, and it's very practical. For us operationally, there are places you cannot carry a gun. So having some knowledge of handling a knife and having the right knife with you can be a lifesaver. But the real reason, the main reason is knives, scare the crap out of me. So I figure that if they scare me, they're going to scare anybody else. So that's why I carry it up.
I love that answer because knives, as I would understand it, obviously just as an observer, is that's an intimate weapon. You have to be within at least arm's length of somebody, other than a throwing knife or something, to be able to effectively use a knife. And that does not, the one you have there doesn't seem to be the throwing kind of knife. But it also, that knife looks very nefarious, right? So is that knife that's on the cover of Black Ops, The Life of a CIA Shadow Warrior, is that a standard issue knife?
No, we don't have that kind of pattern. Obviously, we want to be able to vary everything. If everybody in CIA carries the same, bag or the same glasses, it's kind of like a telltale.
Right.
I think knives are more of a choice, and like a gun, there's no gun for all seasons or holsters for all reasons. Sometimes all you can get away with is a small pistol in your pocket. Other times you can carry loaded. It all depends on what your mission is, and the knife, that applies to the knife also.
Okay, so this would be one of those questions I warned you about, and I preface it with that. When you put a knife in a cover like that, and I think about, okay, that you did live the life of a CIA Shadow Warrior, it leaves me thinking that you've used one of those at least once in a special in a Black Op somewhere. Yes?
I think it has dissuaded individuals from doing harm once or twice.
Dissuaded, yeah. You and your little friend. All right, so I find Black Ops, and especially when I was looking at when you're talking about that you were on the operations side of the CIA. I am reminded of this show. It's a frivolous show, but it's been kind of fun to watch, called The Recruit. And there's a big emphasis in The Recruit between the different sides of the CIA, one of which I hadn't given much thought to, which is the legal side of the CIA, the people that are there, the attachés that make sure that everything that is done by the book or needs to be. And there's a conflict between the ops people and the lawyer people. And since I never really spent a lot of time thinking about that, it's sort of new to me. Does that have the ring of truth that there are these divisions within the CIA which make it, for what other people refer to it as, the company, that this is much more the corporate side of espionage?
Well, the agency is divided into directorates, and the Directorate of Operations, the clandestine service, is where I served all my career. We have the analytical side, which is the Director of Intelligence, and all these things are changing now because they're doing some revamping here for the last couple of years. The lawyer issue, or the lawyer phenomena, I would say, is a creature of the early 90s. In the early 90s, there was probably 5 lawyers in all of CIA. But with time, we have every single area division, and every component has at least one and sometimes 2. In the counterterrorist center, where I worked for half of my career, we had some really good lawyers. And the beauty of a good lawyer at the agency is the guy or the gal that doesn't say no. They tell you, let's see how we can make this legal. Because the biggest fantasy, and that I try to attack in my book, is the fact that the agency is law-abiding, that even when we do black ops, they are blessed at the highest level of the U.S. government. So lawyers that could actually sit down and say, okay, this is, after 9/11, we need a presidential finding, and we got it on 17 September.
Yeah, but that's a really interesting way of looking at it. So it's you within the bounds of here's the absolute cannots over here. Then here's that gray area which we're not going to ask too many questions about. Is that roughly how something like that would be in a line of demarcation?
Well, I think the way that a good attorney handles it is he figures out a way to get the right approvals. For example, for some operations post 9/11, we would go to DOJ, the interrogation, the enhanced interrogation programs. I wasn't involved with those, but I know because I went through SEER school in the military, so it's the same thing. But we went to DOJ, the Department of Justice, and asked if these things were actually legal. And everybody that was briefed agreed, and though it makes that signature easier for a president. We normally work those kind of big cases under a presidential finding, which means the president tells you this is what we need you to do.
And that presidential finding is the aegis, which then allows you to make the boots on the ground decisions to achieve that goal.
Absolutely.
Okay. And without that, then, what would your life be like? If you didn't have that type of, for lack of a better concise term, legal protection to do that, what would that expose you to?
Well, it's not what it would expose you to, it's what it makes you. If you do not have the moral high ground in the legal, by our standards, you cannot judge, the enemy standards, or those are in most cases are very different. So for us, we would be a rogue organization, which is how we most often depict it anyway, doing whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted, and nothing could be further from the truth, from that truth.
Well, post 90s, because prior to that, if there was a paucity of attorneys, say in the 60s, then perhaps it was more prone to going rogue at one point in the past. That would be like the pre-church committee kind of work. Would you agree with that?
Not entirely, and I'll tell you why. Because the agency is guided by what the administration wants. There's a system called the directives, operational directives, that every year the agency puts out to every single component, and this is coordinated from the right people in Congress to the White House. What are our priorities, whether it's, in this case, terrorism, or as back now Russia has come back to the top tier, China is up there. So, but back in the 60s, of course, it was also a different culture. You got to remember that in the 60s, the Russians, the Soviets, were using a lot dirtier tactics in the Cold War than the years that I started serving. They were still using surrogates. The Cubans and the Nicaraguans were wreaking havoc all over Latin America. But, I mean, it was a different epoch. It was a different war. It's like I'm trying to compare World War I with Korea. There's different epochs that call for different rules.
Yeah, okay, and I'm going out on a limb here, but I think I've read enough, I've studied enough formally on the subject to say that there were times when the objectives of the CIA were not in concert with the presidency. And we had some famous examples of Eisenhower being very concerned about how the military-industrial complex was out of control. And Kennedy himself feeling as though that the CIA was kind of running its own game. It may be fair to say that there's more often than not consistency between the executive branch and our intelligence community, but it hasn't always been that way. And when it's not, that's when weird things happen.
And I totally agree. And my point is that we have incredible oversight to everything that we do. And one of the problems is that part of our charter is protecting the President of the United States.
Right.
So there comes things that you can talk about, there's things that you cannot talk about. But I totally agree with you. I mean, the ground rules, I was blessed with the fact that I came into the agency in the early 80s where we were fighting communism. The gloves were off, but it was within the legalities that we impose on ourselves. Right. And it was directly, in this case, it was Reagan who started that program. I totally agree with you. Yeah, oversight's important.
By the way, my sister-in-law is from Cuba, and she had a very similar story as where she came over. I think she was 4, and when she and her family left, her father was kind of a low-level politician, like an alderman or something like that, so not a big shot. But they got out of Cuba They were one of the last flights to get out of Cuba, and there was some ceremonial like firing of weapons as the plane took off, and she landed in the United States and built a beautiful life for herself. And my brother and she have been married forever, and her parents. We celebrated we had Cuban Thanksgiving, Cuban Christmas, and Cuban Easter with my sister-in-law's parents. And so there were moments when I'm reading your bio and I'm thinking that just sounds really familiar. And I think of particularly her mother, Gume, was very sweet to me. Never bothered to learn English, or at least she never let on to how much English she was picking up in the room. But that's a great start for our guest, Ric Prado. So Enrique Prado, the author of Black Ops. We're going to talk for a while before we open the phones, and then after that we'll do open lines too, coming up later on tonight. In for George Norrie, this is Ian Punnett on Coast to Coast AM. Ric Prado, author of Black Ops, The Life of a CIA Shadow Warrior. Boy, I'm getting a ton of questions right away on Twitter. It's unusual, actually, that many that fast out of the gate, but welcome to share those coming up. I'll get as many in as I can before we open up the phones for you next hour. A lot of ground to cover in this life of a guy who worked on the operational side of the CIA and has written a memoir of sorts, but also perhaps an explanation, maybe another way to offer it, where he's really willing to kind of pull back that foggy curtain and show us how things work, and he'll do that coming up next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. As it says on the jacket in the promotional material for Ric Prado's book, Black Ops, a harrowing memoir of life in the shadowy world of assassins, terrorists, spies, and revolutionaries. So, Rick, before we get back into more serious stuff, stupid question. Do you enjoy watching espionage media, reading books, listening to podcasts, watching TV?
I have a very low tolerance for what I'm watching, and to tell you the truth, you mentioned the Bond movies that you watch sometimes. The beauty of that is that we know it's fantasy. So I'm still waiting for my Aston Martin, right? So we know that is it. And I will tell you, I think that the best promotional thing that the Brits ever did was to create James Bond. But I know that that's a fantasy. What bothers me is when I see movies like Jason Bourne, for example, that always portray our individuals as maniacal assassins with 17 personalities doing something that Congress doesn't even know we're doing, blah, blah, blah. And so when movies take that direction, which is too many of them, I go the other way. There are a few out there and a few movies and a few programs that are tolerable, and we understand there's got to be a little bit of Hollywood to it to catch everybody's attention. All right,
name one.
Well, I think movies-wise, one of the best CIA movies is called Argo.
Oh, yeah.
Argo, it was a fantastic movie. It was a very true story. It was we had some hostages.
Right.
We had the hostages in Iran, but we also had some who had been able to escape to a safe house. And this operations officer, he did the fake IDs and all that other stuff. Literally put this incredible operation together in Iran while everything was going hot.
Right.
And he got the people out. So movie-wise, that's one of the ones that I think it's a very strong one. Zero Dark 30. It's a pretty decent one.
I love that movie.
It is well done, and of course, a lot of it is based on Jennifer Matthews, who was a colleague of mine in the Bin Laden task force. She was one of my analysts when we started the unit in '96. But there was also some real misguided things in that movie, and the one that bothered, I think, most of us the most was the fact that how they portrayed what enhanced interrogations are like.
Right.
And that came out more of There was, I think it was Abu Ghraib or something. There was an Army debriefing plane. Yeah, and that place, there were amateurs that were not supervised, and things went really, really stupid. But the movie confuses that. The average person looking at the movie says, "Oh, so this is what they do," and it is not. Our waterboarding in the movies is always a bucket of water over a rag over your face and all that other stuff. When we did the waterboarding, and like I said, I wasn't part of that, but what the agency did for waterboarding comes out of the enhanced interrogation training that we in the special military, that that's where I started, goes under. It's called SEER School. And it's literally on a gurney. The guy is monitored. They have blood pressure cuffs on him, everything else. And there's time limits of how long you could do it. It's more of a tool to speed up the breakdown of the individual, because the real breakdown is music going 24/7, being, not letting you sleep, the sleep deprivation. All these things are the things that wear people out. And the waterboarding is just that one extra little nudge to get them to tell us what we need to do.
There was a scene about waterboarding in a movie called Safe House with Denzel Washington, right?
Yes.
Ryan Reynolds. What I like about that, there was the scene that I liked is he's going into the detail of the cotton used in the towels, because operationally he knew what would be more effective to use on him, because he'd done that to other people, so he knew the right weight of the towel to use. I thought there was that little detail I always thought that stuck with me. Thought on that?
It's a good Hollywood angle, and obviously it did its job. It got your attention, and you enjoyed it. But I guarantee you that no case officer I I have ever met will know what size towels we use for waterboarding. And if they do, they probably wouldn't admit it anyway. So yeah.
I mean, other than the Bond movies, which is interesting to me because I think Daniel Craig's Bond is the most, seems like the thing that's closest to the grittiness of what a Black Ops guy would be like, but I've just put that off to the side for the moment. I think Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the Jean Le Carré book and then the movie based on that, what I really liked about it, that does stress this whole bureaucracy of intelligence gathering and all the and having to keep track of the paperwork and the recordings and it the library of information and all the forms you have to fill out. And I think there are some aspects of that which obviously don't necessarily add well to a Hollywood production, but those are the reality of your life. Is there are forms involved, right? I mean, you aren't just like sent off. You do have to write up operations reports, right? And you have to sort of explain what happened. Yeah,
absolutely. As a matter of fact, we get almost as much training in writing and expressing ourselves succinctly, because when we write an intelligence report, that your goal is for that to hit Congress the following day. If you score one of those, so when we write something, it has to be succinct and it has to be accurate and it has to be truthful. That's one of the big things in the agency that again is never highlighted in the media, is the fact that our integrity. If you want to get fired by the agency in a nanosecond, steal $1 from the agency or misinterpret an intelligence to make it sound better than what it was, it will get you fired and kicked out, and your clearance is revoked, and you name it.
Interesting.
And as well as it should be, yes.
Well, then let me amend this part of your biography. So, Ric Prado spent his first 10 years at CIA, but training includes airborne, scuba, advanced combat medical rescue, SEER, mountain climbing, jungle survival, and writing really good reports.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a line in the recruit which is interesting where somebody said, well, how do I, he's a new guy in the CIA, he said, how do I do that? And he said, fly coach, get a mid-range rental car and save all your receipts. We don't call it the company for nothing. And I thought, okay, again, that seemed like a truthful moment for at least for these types of movies.
Well, and there was some levity in that scene. I did watch that first episode.
Did you?
It's not my style of movie, but I watched it. But there's certain levity there. But it's true. I mean, our accountings have to be very, very sharp, and I'll explain why. Because we work under what they call fenced funds. The Congress approves, the agency approves, to each area division what they can spend on what kind of programs. So it is sacrosanct for you to, if you get $10 million to work this particular account, just because you got $1 million left over that account, you just cannot take that money and say, well, I'm going to put that money over here because come September we're going to lose it. So that's, for us, accounting, both at the micro and the macro level, are very, very important in the agency. Yeah, look. You never saw James Bond write an after-action report, did you?
No.
I don't think even the books mention him having to write up
after-action. That's very funny. Ric Prado, this is so enjoyable. Thank you so much again for stepping in. The book is Black Ops. It's gone very well. Are you ready for this? Have this been optioned for something I'm going to be seeing on Netflix coming up?
We're actually working on pitching with putting together a proposal to Netflix, Amazon, or whatever. But it's not going to be a documentary. They're going for more of a mini-series, and keeping as much truth about how the agency operates, and the reality of our work. And from reading the book, that in our there's all kinds of sexy operations that we describe there.
Right.
They're just not the Hollywood version of the things that we see. They're still dangerous. We don't have 139 stars in our wall because this is a hobby. There's people that have sacrificed their lives for all of this. So that's very accurate. Very accurate.
Have any of those stars ever come down?
What do you mean?
Well, so reports are reports, right? And epochs of history have different sort of operational understandings. What's that? So I wonder whether anybody's ever been reconsidered of no, that shouldn't be up there.
No, I mean these are all very clear-cut cases.
Okay.
The parameters are very well delineated. If you are in harm's way in the agency carrying out a legal mission, like all our missions are, and you lose your life, that star will go on the wall and will remain there. Now, the one thing that can change, and it has in certain cases, earlier stars that we could not say who they were. After a certain amount of time, the agency has said, okay, it's time to honor this individual so their family can really know, because the operations he was in were 30 years ago. That's about the only change to the stars there. And unfortunately, what we keep doing is adding. You figure almost a third of those stars that we have on the wall are post 9/11.
Interesting. Sad, but very interesting. Several people have tweeted to me about Annie Jacobson's book, Surprise, Kill, Vanish, and asked whether you would share your opinion on that.
Well, I have to share really good opinions because I'm in that book. There's actually several pages on me on that book. It's an excellent compiling of information. Annie, I know Annie personally. I helped her with certain parts of that book that were authorized. But the amount of research that she did and the wide audience that she canvassed within the agency and within the community in our special military, a lot of that book has the main protagonist is a guy named Billy Waugh, who's a very, very dear friend of mine. Billy Waugh was a Green Beret legend in Vietnam during the early years, did 20-some years in the agency. He is the guy that was doing surveillance on bin Laden when we started the bin Laden task force, Mike Scheuer and myself. He is the guy that captured Carlos the Jackal, Elix Ramirez, the infamous terrorist. He's the one that found him in Khartoum. So, the book is excellent. It's one of the books that I recommend. And anytime somebody tells me that they want to know a little bit more about special operations, because it's not just intelligence. There's a lot of military in the book. Excellent book.
Yeah, this may be more of a disparity between Central Intelligence and military intelligence, but I remember when, and somebody asked me to ask you about this, when Manuel Noriega was holding up in his palace and wouldn't come out, and they were blasting him 24/7 with rock music like Panama by Van Halen. Was that like? I mean, it seemed kind of amateurish, to be totally honest. I never found that very clever. But does that sort of thing work? And what was the general feeling about that at the time?
Well, I wasn't directly involved with it. I do know some people that were. A lot of that was the military had the operational control for, because it wasn't, it was an invasion, for lack of a better term. In order to get him out of power and slow down the narco trafficking that he was supporting. But in war, and this was a war, there are no rules. Whatever you want to do, whatever you want to try, if it works, it's good. If it didn't work, it's not good. Yeah. And you learn from that. But, innovation and creativities are huge tools in the intelligence community, because I think that's what we use the most, is that, be able to come up with something that gets you to where not the average individual could ever get to.
Yeah, but so that seemed more like theater put on for the 24/7, news channels. And if it just sort of seemed doomed from the beginning. If you could defeat the sound and the lights with a couple of wads of toilet paper in your ears and a rag, you could get to sleep. It wasn't going to be like lying on the floor going, I can't take it anymore. It just didn't seem like that was going to be very effective.
No, and that wouldn't happen. I think that, again, it was just one more tool that they were using to harass him, to demoralize him and his troops. So,
right.
But no, singularly, that would have absolutely no major impact on anything. So
I can't imagine. Now, I want to ask you about an illegal operation. Because we've been talking about the legal stuff, and you mentioned, too, about, steal a dollar, misconstrue a report to your own advantage or something. And that brings me to something which we talked a lot about on the show over the years, and what was originally sort of passed off and then dismissed and now verified, which is the MK Ultra program of the illegal human experimentation that was undertaken by the CIA. I'm not holding you responsible for it. My question is, where would MK Ultra have fallen under that operational structure of the CIA? Do you have any idea?
Well, first of all, you're talking something that I was probably still in Cuba when some of this
right,
stuff
totally
was going on.
Yeah,
so,
that's what I'm saying. It's not you. I'm not putting it at your feet. But
and most of the people that I work with were from a different epoch anyway. But the CIA has a medical division, Office of Medical Services, and they are doctors, psychiatrists, medics, and there's also the Directorate of Science and Technology, which is usually more of the high-tech, anything from satellites to, lizard-sized bugs that they could put in your house or whatever.
Right.
But they would also be, in charge of any kind of those experiments. When we say illegal, I don't know. Again, I wasn't there, but was this something that was unilaterally decided by the agency? Was it something that the military was also doing? Was it something that was approved at a higher level? And that we will probably never know.
Yeah. Okay, so poisons come up a little bit. This idea that, especially when it comes perhaps to used on our people or used on, like in England or some that Russian operatives will use poison, or they'll use radioactive material or some barium or something. The bugs and gas stuff, that kind of thing. Where is the CIA on that these days operationally?
That's never been a tool that I have ever witnessed or even heard of being used.
By the CIA.
By the CIA, yeah, of course,
Yeah.
by the CIA. The Russians are known for that kind of operation where they will hunt anybody who betrays them, or anybody who they believe is going to betray them. They will do exactly what you just described. The Chinese will compromise. They're very good at putting a incredibly striking woman or male, depending where you're at, and compromise you, drug you, all this kind of stuff. I never witnessed that in the agency in any of my time.
I don't even know why, in some respects, with all of the modern technology now on morphing of images, the creation of false videos, all of the I don't even know why you'd even have to bother to do compromise like that when you could just as easily fake it, in a computer. But hang on to that thought. Well, that's where we'll hold it for now. Talking to Ric Prado, Black Ops is the name of the book. It's super cool. So is he, as you can hear. And we'll get back to this in just a few minutes, and then we'll get to your phone calls too. Black Ops, the life of a CIA shadow warrior. And then an hour from now, we'll go to open lines too, coming up. Coast to Coast AM. Black Ops is the name of the book. It's the life of a CIA shadow warrior. It's Ric Prado, and he's joined us as our main guest tonight on Coast to Coast. I'm just on for tonight, do some open lines coming up, and then back again next week for Friday and Saturday. Pretty geeked, by the way, for next weekend. I'll give you more on that coming up. Good weekend of shows ahead, though, too. Always take a look at coasttocoastam.com and plan accordingly. Bottom of this hour, that's our way of saying, at the 30 mark, you'll have a chance to grab a phone line and join the conversation with Ric Prado. But I've got a couple more questions I got to get to next from his book, Black Ops. On Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett. So, Ric Prado, we were just talking about the idea of compromise. And the Chinese use it all the time to get leverage on people. But in an era of deep fakes, why even bother to actually set up real people under these circumstances? If all you need is a video or a photo, aren't we at a point where voice, body, everything else can be faked?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. However, I think that technology, always being a two-edged sword, is that there are ways of detecting some kind of manipulation. But it's an excellent point, because you might be able to compromise somebody or threaten him. They know that it's not real. I think that is the biggest thing. When the person wakes up with, three women in bed and he's married, he knows that he's been had. Where when they actually do it with technology alone, even if it isn't detectable, is he as vulnerable? So it would have to be very well done. The fact that he was in the area, all these kind of complexities that go there. But I think that we're going on that. When we look at the technology of avatars, people, they look almost real. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes you question what actually does it mean for something to be real if half the time we see somebody on television, we know that they've gone and they've taken out some of their lines, or they've on their face, or they've put filters in, or they've manipulated their voice. I mean, everything starts to become an argument for, does it really matter whether it happened? If the threat is this will be released to the public is not going to be that sophisticated to go, well, that's an obvious fake. And so if the leverage is just, we'll show this not to your wife, she'll believe you one way or another, but we'll show this to the public, and either way, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think that there is that venue that is going in that direction. I personally was never involved with it, but I could see it having incredible traction. We do not use, we recruit, what we say is we recruit for strengths. We rather have somebody who's ideologically compatible with the freedoms that they may be trying for their country. That's the person that you ideally recruit, because you're not asking them to betray their country. You're asking them to help, change their country to a better, political situation. And the opposite of that is, like I said, what the Russians and the Chinese do, which is, recruiting for weaknesses. And if you don't have them, they create them for you.
Yeah. After the 9/11 investigations and failures within the intelligence communities and et cetera, and I'm not holding you responsible for any of that, but there was this feeling that we had become, as a nation or as an arm of the government or the military, whatever, that we become too dependent on technology and not enough on human intel, that our human is what might have revealed the plans, and technology was part of the massive fail. The lack of human intel and the overdependence on technology, including drones and stuff. Where does that stand these days, and where are you with that?
Well, first of all, you're spot on with that. I mean, the technology is technology, but the real truth can only be gotten, or most of the time can only be gotten, through human sources. Those are the ones that are verifiable. You use technology to corroborate an asset's reporting, for example. But there was an epoch, which is you're referring to, that the agency was putting more and more emphasis on high-tech abilities. You mentioned the issue of drones. Well, drones are this century's, a new tool. But when we were using the drones in Afghanistan, it was used fairly sparingly. That's become a very common thing in the last 8 years or whatever it's been. And there's a downside of that. When you do an actual raid on an individual or a camp, you collect intelligence. You may be able to bring out somebody. You may be able to bring out their computers, their cell phones. When I was in Iraq, they were turning operations within 2 hours, hit a house, and then the intelligence gathered from that would send you to a second house or to a different location. So the drone is a perfect example of that overdependence on technology at the expense of gathering hands-on intelligence.
Right. And if we had that, then we might have had more clues, and they might have been processed differently, because some of what I understand, and I'm assuming that this is still the prevailing wisdom, is we had all the data. We had plenty of indications of what was happening. We weren't processing it correctly. It was out there, and it wasn't being threaded. It wasn't being woven together in a continuous narrative.
Yeah, and that has happened before in history. When you remember when the Iran rescue attempt that
right.
turned into a complete goat rope, that was what came out of that was SOCOM and JSOC, because they realized that you cannot have an army that hasn't worked with the Air Force, that hasn't worked with the Navy, and that cross-pollination, especially on the special operations side of the house, which is where I come from. Yeah. That's pretty blatant. But it applies to the agency also, absolutely.
That's a really interesting observation, that there's too much denominationalism in the military, that unless that they're used to working and training together to pull off an operation like that, there would, unless I'm misinterpreting you, there would be too many egos, perhaps, or too much foundational work that hadn't taken place building the team before the team is put on the field.
Absolutely. That is exactly the point. And like I said, that's what created Special Operations Command and the Joint Special Operations Commands, right, where they are represented by Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Special Operations Tier 1 and Tier 1 units like Delta and SEAL Team 6.
Ric Prado received the CIA's Distinguished Career Intelligence Medal. What aspects of your former life do you miss?
Well, I will tell you, the camaraderie is a big part of it. It's like any time that you go in harm's way with somebody else, there's a bonding there that a lot of people never experience. So that's one of the things that I miss. The other, a little bit more pragmatic, is I miss not having to watch the news to know what's going on, rather than show up in my office and the secretary had on my desk, what was important for me to read first thing in the morning, and knowing that it was, chances are it was a lot more factual than anything we're going to get. So I do miss that. But and of course, look, the action is the juice. If you believe in what you're doing and you believe in it enough that you are going in harm's way, there is a certain high that comes from that, because it's satisfaction at all levels. The success aspect, the adrenaline aspect, the danger aspect, but the fact that you are doing something that the average individual can never even dream of doing. So that's what we call it. So the action is the juice.
On how many fingers would it take for you to count the things you regret?
I'm not big on regrets, because normally, if you're a smart enough person, you're making decisions based on the information that you have at the time.
Right.
And the benefit of 20/20 hindsight doesn't translate to the present. So I'm not big on regret. I think that there are always things that we could do better. And I would say that there's two or three things. In this case, I can't talk about, but things that if I would have been more forceful trying to push this operational initiative, maybe we would have been able to do this or that and the other. And one of the ones that comes to mind, of course, is when we were chasing bin Laden. When we opened up the task force in '96, we had him in Khartoum, and by the end of '96, early '97, we could have rendered him for interrogation and for prosecution, for lack of a better word, because we knew the amount of money he was spending training terrorists and the outreach that he was putting to other terrorist organizations. The big click thing with bin Laden was that he became kind of like the godfather of terrorism, where he had tentacles connecting them to all kinds of different factions out there, supporting them. But if we would have been able to capture bin Laden in 1997, that means the bombing of the Cole would have never happened. The twin embassies that we had in Africa that got hit simultaneously probably would have happened. And even you can take it out to 9/11.
Sure.
Failure to act.
Yeah, I'm not big on regret either, and I think we do the best we can with what we got where we are. If you're emotionally intelligent enough to know that we don't have crystal balls, we can't always know that our decisions are going to be perfect. But I think there are certain things that happen to us all when we close our eyes at the end of the night, we're putting our head on a pillow and we go, "Damn it." So that's what I was getting at. It was not so much operationally in terms of what the system failed, but whether there are moments where you think to yourself, darn it, if I had been this, then this might not have happened. And
I'll give you a really good example. It's a very personal one, but it's a real example.
That's what I'm going for.
I kept my wife completely in the dark about what I was really doing. Yes, she knew I worked for the agency. She knew that I worked in counterterrorism, or that I was chief of the Koreas, or I was at bin Laden task force, blah, blah, blah. But events like what happened to me in the Philippines, that me and my partner almost got killed by a hit team, she never knew about that until she read the book. And in hindsight, I should have been a little bit more open to her, because our job is very hard on marriages. You're out all kinds of times of the night. You come home in moods that most regular people do not understand.
Right.
And if I would have taken the time to explain to my wife, without going into sources and methods, but look, we had a close call today. This is why, or I lost a guy today. And now she understands that, Johnny's father next door has a bad day, means he didn't sell enough cars at the car dealer. When I have a bad day, I might have lost a colleague, I might have lost an asset, I might have lost an operation, and that's a very heavy burden to bring and keep onto your own shoulders all by themselves.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm going for. How do you reconcile that?
Well, I write about it in the book, so other officers will hopefully understand that. I mean, my wife cuts me a lot more slack now, in the sense of temperament, because she understands the world that I had to live in for 25 years.
Right.
And that's, that was after my special military and everything else. So it is. I think it's a word of advice to anybody, whether it's law enforcement or the intelligence community, being a little bit more frank with your other half about what is bothering you. What dangers were you in? What did you see today that you cannot unsee? We all have that. Things that we have seen that operationally and in conflicts that you cannot erase. Well, how do you explain that to somebody? You sensitize them a little bit without making them panic, without making them feel, apprehensive. But at the same time, they need to know what makes you tick and what's ticking you.
How much mental health support are agents given if they request it?
Oh, it's very, very, very robust. And as a matter of fact, it's not only requesting it, it is proactive. And I'll give you another example. Well, I was in a Latin American country doing dangerous stuff, and I had been in the Costa Rica with the Contras, in Honduras with the Contras, and then I went to the Philippines, and the Office of Medical Services, the psychiatrist, called me in. And they said, well, we want to ask you a question. Why are you going from danger post to danger post to danger post? And that sounded so absurd to me. But there are people that, they go to Europe and they do other things that are a little bit more sophisticated or more, of the conventional Cold War kind of stuff. I wasn't involved in that after I went to the counterterrorism side of the house. So yeah, it's something to focus on, and the realities are that you cannot keep all this to yourself. You actually have to have people looking after you. And if you when I was called in for those interviews, I explained to the guys, look, this is what I think I was put on this earth to do. I am a firm believer that we are being tasked to do things that the agency is the only one that has that kind of training and that kind of resources and that flexibility to carry it out. That's why I'm following this. But there's always offer there. Anybody who's having marital problems, alcohol problems, there's a plethora of programs to help them cope with that. It's an investment. It's an investment in a good officer.
And how about in terms of what the agency offers the analysts, where that's a huge, I would imagine, a group that's very important to maintain, to retain, so that you're not cycling in new analysts all the time. You need people who have institutional memory, we would say. What does the CIA do? And I know that wasn't your division necessarily, but what do they do to try to retain the best people so that they will stay within the agency and they're not always having to recruit?
Well, your first statement was extremely strong and correct. We could not be doing operations without our analytical side. I've always been a big fan of our analysts. They're scary smart people. They're incredibly dedicated. And one of the things that the agency has that it really strengthens that is you can have a whole career on a particular subject.
Hang on to that thought. I want to pick that up right there when we get on the other side of this and we give the phone numbers for people to join the conversation with Ric Prado, author of Black Ops, next on Coast to Coast AM. Giving George Norrie a night off. This is Ian Punnett. Black Ops is the name of the book. It's from Ric Prado, and we had mentioned earlier a couple of things I'll get to, but along with your questions coming up as you continue to call, we'll find an open line for you at some point, and then we'll go to open lines at the top of the hour. But the idea of contractors subcontracting out and some of the damage that was done to the CIA's reputation from subcontractors, like Abu Ghraib, and some subcontractors damaged their own reputation so much they had to change their name. But they're still getting used because there's just not enough personnel. And that was a little bit about a few minutes ago when we were talking about retaining the best, the quote-unquote scary smart analysts that the CIA employs. How do you keep those people in the game? How do you keep them feeling good about what they do? How do you? What does our government do to make sure that we don't have a high turnover in a department which really needs people to have a very broad sort of panoramic view of what's going on in the world? That's the question we'll pick up next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Talking with Ric Prado, author of Black Ops. He's a former CIA shadow warrior. The book is linkable at coasttocoastam.com. Super good. All the different forms, audiobooks and all that. So, Rick, where we left it was on the concept, a very corporate concept of retention. But retaining the best people is often hard. Is the CIA the last job you'll ever love?
I was definitely spoiled because, again, if you believe in what you're doing, whether you're an analyst or you're the scientist or you're an operator, the agency provides that venue, and as far as our analysts, they can pick whatever field of expertise they really want to dwell into, and they facilitate things like, for example, if you pick China, they will send you to language school so you could even read Chinese. So there's a lot of benefits, and the most important one is the co-location. That this was one of the big improvements that happened in the 1990s, in the early 1990s, was the co-location of analysts and in the Directorate of Operations folks before they were segregated. And the Counterterrorist Center was one of the first ones that brought in analysts and set them in the same room with operators, and the results were fantastic because now they understood us, they understood what operations were, and we could ask them what to look into that it would benefit us and task those kind of information. So that co-location that started in CTC and then it went agency-wide, I think has done a lot for retaining both ops officers and analysts. And by the way, one of the things that morphed from that marriage was what became the targeting officer. Targeting officers are analysts that focus on finding individuals, finding vulnerabilities, tying the knots to a particular end that we could then mount an operation against.
Right. Does the CIA pay for master's degrees and PhDs and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Yes.
Can you get rich?
Especially the analytical. No.
No one's getting rich in the CIA.
Like I said, I'm still waiting for my Aston Martin. So,
You smoke a nice cigar.
I do. That's a hobby that I entertain, but I don't smoke much. But I do smoke.
Me too. When I get it, I try to get a good one. Do you get better cigars as a result of your connections, be they either because you are a native Cuban or because of your CIA connections? Do you get better cigars than I do?
Well, I probably do. But the funny thing is, I have never bought a Cuban cigar. I refuse to put money in their pocket. Now, I've smoked a bunch because friends of mine would bring me one, a Monte Cristo or a Cojita or whatever from here or there. But the quality of cigars from the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Honduras, they have nothing to envy the Cuban cigars. On the contrary,
right? Because they're all Cuban seeds anyway, right? I mean, they're Cuban wrappers, they're Cuban seeds, right?
Yeah, you know your stuff.
Yeah, a little bit. All right, so let's go wild card. Ron is in Barrier Springs, Michigan, on Coast to Coast AM for Ric Prado. Ron,
hello, Ian. Hello, and Rick. Rick, my information comes from Professor Alfred McCoy, University of Wisconsin. Politics of heroin, politics of cocaine. I saw the heroin epidemic, the CIA heroin epidemic start in Vietnam and then come back home, and it raged. And Iran-Contra, guns for drugs. The Reagan administration had more people convicted and sentenced for their role in guns for drugs with the Iran-Contra, bringing the cocaine epidemic to the United States. I know you'll deny any CIA involvement, but the facts remain. The CIA's...
Well, wait. Just a real quick curiosity. doesn't the convictions prove it?
Actually, and I can clarify that for you very well because I was in that theater.
Okay.
The people that got in trouble were because they were providing weapons, not because of narcotics, providing weapons. This is what the Iran-Contra imbroglio was, that we sold weapons to Iran and used that money to supply the Contra forces. Now, that said, was there drug trafficking? Yes, it was found. But it wasn't the agency. It's the people that were involved with the Contras themselves. And they were rogue. They were, the exception, not the rule. But the people that were convicted, I don't know of a single agency officer that has been convicted for anything that has to do with the narcotics trafficking in an operational theater. Guys like Joe Fernandez and other folks that were crucified for their role in the Contra program, what became the Iran-Contra, eventually were even reinstituted to the agency and given awards because they understood that it was, hey, everybody in headquarters knew what they were doing. It wasn't just them. So the drug issue, absolutely. Every single organization, whether it's FBI or everybody else, will have a bad apple. But when it comes to narcotics, with groups that we work with, like the Filipinos, or with, if we're working with the Salvadorians or we're working with the Colombians, we have a great relationship with Colombians for decades. But are there individuals that are on the wrong side and still working with us? Absolutely. By regulation, if we discover any human rights violations or any drug or human trafficking indicators, we are not allowed to deal with that individual anymore.
I hope that at least addresses part of Ron's question. Will is in Hell's Kitchen, New York, on Coast to Coast. Will?
Hello, gentlemen. Terrific conversation tonight. I'm hanging on every word. And so my question that I called in with is about a specific film from 1996 that I want to ask about. But I also want to throw in another quick question so I can give them both to you and you can respond. My first question would be, is if any people work for the CIA as either part-time and whether it's undercover or not, and whether they're in the private sector or elsewhere in the government, but their assignment in the CIA might be not a full-time assignment. So that's a quick, extra question. But my main purpose for calling was I'm wondering if there are movies or books, but I'm thinking about a movie specifically from 1996 that ever are so similar to something that's going on that they wind up being suppressed.
What movie are you talking about from 96?
So this movie is called The Long Kiss Goodnight, and it's an action thriller with Gina Davis and Samuel L. Jackson. And I'm
Shane Black.
Saw it.
Yeah, it's a great movie. I think these are two really good questions. Let's get the answer because we've got some people hanging on. So, Long Kiss Goodnight. I like that movie. It's the director later went on to do Iron Man 3. I really like his work. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang thing. I think he did too. But so, what did that mean anything to you when you saw that, or if you ever saw that?
I don't recall seeing that movie. I'm not big on movies anyway.
But she plays a person who had been an operative of Black Ops and had tried to then assimilate into mainstream society, had some sort of amnesia event or something. But that was brought back out of that. Does it happen that people retire and then go into a different cover when they leave Black Ops?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people can retire and go work for another federal agency. Some remain on as consultants or contractors, and it could be everything from full-time to part-time. I did that for several years after I retired. I was on boards that I would come in and help with operations and all this other stuff and other connectivity, which obviously I can't talk about. But nonetheless, I stayed busy for several years after that, working with the community, and exactly that. Yeah, it does exist, and it's actually a wonderful thing, because first of all, you retain not only the purpose, but you retain that expertise. When somebody with 25 years walks off, cannot be replaced by somebody who's been in the agency for 3 years. A lot of our work is esoteric and is on-the-job training.
I'm going to share something with you that I don't know that I've ever mentioned on the air, but true story. It was about the mid-'90s, and I was interviewing somebody else about the CIA and the book they had written. It was not specifically about this. They weren't black ops, but I had said something about the CIA using non-military personnel or non-agency people in surveillance or in human intel. And I had mentioned this. I said, I think that'd be really kind of interesting to do in support of my country, et cetera. And I mentioned a country that I was thinking of visiting. And afterward, that author reached out to me and said, if I was ever serious, contact him and he would put me in touch with the right people. If I were traveling in certain countries, they would want me nothing more than just to keep my eyes and ears open and report back to them. Does that happen? Was the guy just yanking my leg?
Absolutely. Really? No, he was not yanking your leg. And it is one of the best resources that the agency has is the patriotism of the average American, including individuals that are heads of corporations. Like if you have a business with the Chinese, or with the Russians, or with North Korea, or any kind of that access, and you're an American, absolutely. Most of those individuals, by the way, are volunteers. They see that they have access that the agency may want to use, and they approach it one way or the other, or we see the individual comes across our scope, we know it's a good American, he gets approached, and then we ask them for help. It's a very viable and a very lucrative. We get a lot of good results out of that system.
I should have taken that trip. Lee is in Alabama on Coast to Coast. Lee?
Rick, I wanted to ask you a question, and before you give your thoughts on it, I wanted to have a comment or two. I can't understand why the intelligence... I'm sorry?
Got to be quick here. We've just got a couple of people hanging on. Go ahead.
Okay. I can't understand why the intelligence agencies won't release the JFK files, because it'll be 60 years in November, and I imagine a lot of people have passed away now. But I know some people are suspicious that the intelligence agencies are embarrassed about what might come out, that they didn't do a better job protecting them and so forth.
Oh, well, that's a great question. That's a big question. Where are you with that, Rick?
Well, you got to understand that, again, this is before my time. I came to this country in '62, and Kennedy was killed in '63. So, but the declassification of information doesn't have a deadline. Again, covert actions, black operations, means things that the agency has been asked to do by the administration that needed to be hidden, the American hand hidden from whatever the outcome of that operation was. So not making excuses, and I have no idea if indeed there was either a sanctioned or a rogue element of the agency working with the mafia, because I've read all about that stuff,
Right.
But it is not what it normally is portrayed as.
All right. I think he overspoke. Literally, thousands and thousands and thousands of pages have been released. Some of the material is still redacted. Yeah. And so that's the question is, like, who are we protecting all these years later on that we have to redact out names out of a report when that it's, if there, no one's going to go to jail. I can answer that for you. It's actually fairly simple. You have. Let me give you an example. You have an agency officer that worked counterterrorism and actually was responsible for taking down some real bad guys. You're talking to one of them, okay? But what if that individual was doing this undercover or was an asset of ours, a Argentine or a Colombian or a Frenchman that we had recruited to do Mission X,
and he or she caused damage to a criminal organization or a terrorist organization. You release that 30 years later, and that organization still exists, they can go after his family.
Yeah.
So it is a matter of it's called sources and methods. We also don't tip our hands on how we do things because most of our operations are recyclable.
Right.
Hey, this worked, so we could try it over here. So
right. We've got Mark on a first-time caller line. That may be all we get to before the top of the hour. Mark is in California on Coast to Coast. Go ahead, Mark.
Rick, Ian, how are you guys doing?
Good.
Really great, Mark.
A statement and a question. Son Cristobal de la Habana, best cigar I ever had. Friend of mine brought it from Spain. Paid a ton of money for them. They're not cheap over there. Question is, I read your stuff in Recoil. Why two Lady Smiths around the ankles versus, let's say, a Glock, two Glocks in 380 or two Glocks in 9?
Well, that's actually a very good question, and it's an easy answer. I mentioned this to Ian earlier on. There's no gun for all seasons or holsters for all reasons. The reason that I wore the two 38s in my ankle was because during the first Iraq War, when I was dealing with volunteers that were Iraqi, I would take them to this hotel that was 5-star in the Philippines, and they would they would put you through the wand for metal detector, but they never went below your knees. So I couldn't walk in there with a Glock or a 1911 or anything else on my hip. So I would carry two 38s with spare ammo in my ankles, and I would get in. And now I had assurance that whoever I was meeting, chances are that they had to leave their weapon in the car because they wanted. So that was a tactical decision. Do I rather carry two Glocks? Absolutely. But how could I get them in there so the two revolvers in my ankles were my life-saving line?
I love that. We are running out of time. I have a question for you, and everybody else, if you want to hang on for open lines, you're welcome to, or we'll ask Rick to come back sometime. But was there ever a time when you were in this is how I know I would be, so this is a me question. You're time here to CIA. You're standing in front of a file cabinet, and you're like, I wonder. And you open up a file cabinet just to see whether you can get an answer to a personal question. In 15, 20 seconds, can you tell me, have you ever looked up something just to find out what the CIA actually knew about it, even though the information wasn't public?
No, because there's very severe confrontation in the agency. You only have access to those things that you're authorized to have access, and to go into any other files, both electronically and paper, is a very highly regulated thing in the agency.
Okay. God, I'm disappointed about that. But enjoy your candor so much, and a wonderful book. Can't recommend it enough. We'll have you back if you can make time for us coming up in the new year. I hope it's a big one. You don't have to keep talking about Black Ops. You don't have to be talking about the CIA. You can bring up anything you want. It's open lines. I ask only that if if you've heard when we've done this on open lines before, it's really fun to hear fresh voices. And so if you're a reg and you get lots of airtime on Coast to Coast, this is an opportunity for you to enjoy what other people have to say. So we'll make that one stipulation for you, and we'll ask that then everybody you're going to hear on open lines tonight might be very open to being a first-time caller. Next on Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett. Let's go open lines. Todd is in Bellevue, Washington on Coast to Coast AM to get us started. Todd, where are you going to take us?
Thank you, Ian. Now, the band Queensryche had done an album called Operation Mindcrime, which is all about a Manchurian candidate assassin and a evil empire-type secret society taking over the U.S. government, which he could have played. And I just wanted to mention Christopher DeGarmo from Queensryche has a band now called The Rue with his daughter, Riley DeGarmo, on vocals. And I was curious if you would ever want to play some of their stuff. And he's also a private pilot who flies executives. And would you ever book a flight with him?
I have no problem booking a flight with any qualified pilot. So, no, that wouldn't be a problem. I wouldn't even ask. And I think I saw a story about that some time ago after you mentioned it. No, I like Queensryche, and I've played Silent Lucidity before as a bumper. I may have played something else too when it was appropriate from Bumper. So no, I'm pro Queensryche. I haven't heard the new lineup without DeGarmo. How does the band sound with the new lead vocalist?
Well, I don't handle anything since he left. I mean, he left a long time before they got that guy. I mean, Chris DeGarmo essentially was the band.
Right.
So it's one of those problems where it's like he was the John Fogerty of the band, and the other guys had too much resentment towards him because they weren't making money, so they were stealing his songs, so that's why he left the band. And, you know, they were the biggest band in the world in 1990, and, you know, because of Silent Lucidity, and Chris has essentially left the music business, and he's playing with his daughter Riley now in The Roo, like a kangaroo from, you know, Winnie the Pooh, and he's playing with his daughter, you know, and people should just listen to it. I mean, get him in the studio or whatever it takes, you know, book a flight, get on the plane with him.
Well, I'm not going to book a flight just to fly with a pilot, but I mean, I would think if the opportunity came up, I certainly wouldn't turn it down. I appreciate the comment, and rest assured, Queensryche has been used as a bumper in the past, and should it be appropriate, I will use them again. I've got a thing for metal, I always have, and I think I demonstrate that, and I also like progressive metal, and they were kind of, you know, there was that album that had Silent Lucidity, felt much more like a Pink Floyd album, I think, than it did a Queensryche, a typical Queensryche album, I thought, and it reminded me a lot. It kind of came out at the same time as Enter Sandman, and I thought there was sort of this cool shift toward more melodic, less speed on a lot of the bands that I had already enjoyed. I thought it was cool. They're good. All right, so that's a good way to get us started. Let's go to Bill, east of the Rockies in Trenton on Coast to Coast. Bill?
Yes, thank you for taking my call, and Happy New Year, by the way.
And to you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask your guest, because I want to preface it. I was going into the FBI back in '79, but I turned it down. I stayed teaching, but I knew I had a colleague, a Cuban colleague, that went to an agency. And I wanted to ask your guest two questions, and you probably can help because you read the book. Is that his pen name, and what is his alma mater?
You know, that's not his pen name, so and it's not a nom de guerre. It's not a but
nom de plume.
No, nom de guerre, the war name. So it's not even like his CIA cover name or anything like that. Yeah.
Right.
I can't remember where he had so much training, and I don't remember off the hand. I can go look it up, and I can get back to you on that.
Okay.
But obviously a very smart guy.
Yeah, he is. And also, the report on JFK is not going to come out till 2053, after we're all dead. And thank you for taking my call.
Well, yes and no. I mean, there's tons of stuff that's out there. You know, I just ordered some, actually, not that long, about a year ago. So there are plenty of things that are available from FOIA. There's lots of docs that researchers have already been working with. That unredacted stuff is still weird, and I'll grant you that. And why ever they feel the need to hold that, and they could always decide even in 2053, it's kind of an arbitrary number, we're going to extend that another 20 years. They still have that option, too. I don't think they should. I think it's a black mark on us in otherwise a society that depends on transparency in our government. We deserve it. And why the CIA would be involved in any aspect of the JFK assassination remains a question. I was just listening to the E. Howard Hunt tape. Remember this? On the air 20 years ago. No, probably 15 years ago. I had on St. John Hunt, E. Howard Hunt's son, and he aired nationally for the first time the quote-unquote deathbed confession of E. Howard Hunt. And it was so interesting because this was you could tell it was a home cassette recording, and he had some things he wanted to get off his mind. He did not, in fact, die. E. Howard Hunt survived that. He was, to many people, he was identified as being one of the hobos, one of the three hobos. He wasn't. But his relationship and his insight into the JFK shooting pops up on this confession. And he talks about other people involved, that he turned down the opportunity to be involved. But the fact that he was offered it is scary enough. And he was not talking about it in terms of protecting the president. He was talking about it in terms of protecting intelligence, which speaks to something that Ric Prado, author of Black Ops, and I talked about in the first hour. I went to go find it. I used to have it on one of my drives, and I went to go listen to it. I couldn't find it anywhere. Not that anything had happened to it. It was nothing clandestine. I just couldn't find it. I have a couple of these things floating around. So I went online and I was looking, and I found a website that had the deathbed confession of E. Howard Hunt. And then there was a sort of discussion board afterward about this. So I went to go listen to it again. And what was really funny is as soon as I hit play, I heard the guy who was introducing the tape with St. John Hunt talking about E. Howard Hunt and the deathbed confession, and it was me. Kind of freaked me out. So I hit this play, and somebody had recorded it off of the air, off Coast to Coast, and that's how it lived on the internet. And I've yet to find a clean version that doesn't have me on it. But it was a really interesting show, and it speaks to the fact that we really do need to clear that up once and for all. I don't see the upside at all to the CIA or to the government to not having all the cards on the table on that. And I understand what Rick said, but I don't know that I believe that. I believe that's their position, the CIA's position, but I just don't believe it's as helpful as they think in the long run. Wildcard line, Ace is in Buffalo, New York on Coast to Coast. Oh, Ace is gone. Joe is in El Paso on Coast to Coast. Joe?
Hey, how's it going? How are you
doing all right
tonight, Ian?
Go ahead. Where are you going to take us?
So I actually am from, I don't want to give too much away.
Okay.
But I will tell you this. I do have a friend that is in the upper epsilon of military in the Top Gun-esque of what you would call the military, right?
Okay, I don't know quite what you mean. Do you mean Top Gun as in the pilot service, or are you talking about...
Sort of like the movie, like the Air Force, and sort of like what they got going on, and sort of like the Tom Cruise character to a degree, right?
He's an elite pilot.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Someone who trains other people on fighter pilots.
Okay.
I would not like to notify what part of
okay, we're over that. But go ahead. Tell me what was. So what's the point? You have a friend, and now what?
A close friend, a friend that I've known my entire life that has told me that this person has had experience with extraterrestrials. Now, how may you see that? Maybe one thing. However, I see. So. It might not be exactly how you think, right?
Well, none of this is surprising in light of the video that the Pentagon has released with fighter pilots, elite fighter pilots, who have engaged with UAPs in videos they've yet to be able to explain. We have lots of those videos, and there's plenty of testimony from pilots who have said that they have engaged what we used to call Foo Fighters, but these lights and other things which were chasing them or coming at them or whatever. So, yeah, I believe that there are lots of pilots who would say that. Yep.
I will tell you this, Ian. I am not a necessarily old person. I don't know if you can tell by my voice, but I am not someone who is old by age.
Okay.
Okay. And my friend is similar age to myself.
Okay.
And this person is within the United States.
I got this. You seem to be talking about it like there's a credibility gap. I don't think there is one. So you're trying to bridge that. I perfectly accept you have a friend. He's a good friend. These are his experiences. But these are very public now at this point. The Pentagon has been pretty forthcoming about this. So,
sure. And what has the public done about it? What is exactly anyone reacted towards it in the public realm?
I don't know what that means. We're reacted to it. People were curious. They still want more. The Pentagon is saying we can't figure this out. There'll be more investigations. I can't get in a plane and go find them. So
I understand that, Ian, but you can also understand me when I say that the general public of the United States of America has not given it Don Diddley about what extraterrestrials are about in this country.
Okay, well, you're talking to the wrong guy on the wrong show, that's all. So I think I'm not sure where this is going, but yeah, I mean, we talk about this kind of thing all the time. So the general public, I think you'll find if you look at even what Pew Research polls or AP polls or most Americans are kind of down with the idea that there could be something going on and they want the military to tell us more. I'm kind of powerless to find out more at this point just because I want to. I'm sort of waiting for more research and more people and more videos. But I'm open to it, and I think most people in the public are. So, but I think you should be calling some other radio shows and trying to make that claim with them and remind them that we talk about it all the time on Coast to Coast. John is in Columbus, Ohio on Coast to Coast. John?
Hey, so I just wanted to talk about this experience that I've had with the time slip phenomenon.
Sure.
So I know this might sound innocuous, but I was on break at my workplace, and I went into a McDonald's. So in the McDonald's, I was like, well, I think I'm going to order something at the counter. But before I do that, I had this urge to use the bathroom.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to circumvent going up to the counter and go to the bathroom really quickly.
Okay.
So
you're gonna have to get to the crux of the story really quickly. So you're saying you walk into a McDonald's, you go to the bathroom.
I'm leading to it. Please.
Okay.
Ian, please. So I start to go to the bathroom, but then there are these two kind of crazy-looking guys who are covered in drywall dust, and they're gesticulating and being very animated. And there's something about them where I say, like, oh, I don't want to go in the bathroom with those guys. So I stop, I wait, and then I stand there, and then eventually someone goes in front of me, and I almost stop them, but they go in, and okay, fine. I'm almost going to go back up to the counter, and then he comes out. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go in there.
Okay.
And I go in the bathroom, and I look around. It's a normal McDonald's bathroom.
Yeah.
And they aren't there.
Okay.
They just didn't exist. I mean, it's almost like they didn't exist. It was so bizarre. I looked for how they could have gotten out of that bathroom.
Sure.
How, there's nothing but a drop ceiling. And I thought, like, okay, well, maybe
so what do you make of it? What's the upshot?
Well, I mean, I think that there was... I don't really know. I mean,
okay.
I can't say that I can interpret it, but it was just such a bizarre experience.
Okay. Well, it sounds like it. Wish I could make more of it than that, but there you go. So it just goes to tell you this is open lines. People are going to have their experiences they're going to share, and we'll try to make sense of it all with you or for you as best we can, or just share in that story of yours. Next on Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett. Black Ops was the name of our book that we talked about in the first hour, the life of a CIA shadow warrior. Ric Prado was so much fun. It was great. And we have other great shows, too, coming up on Coast to Coast AM. Always take a look at the schedule. Tomorrow night, World War II Nazi Conspiracy with Brad Meltzer. And then Sunday night, the Minority UFO Encounters and Mysteries of Ancient America. I'm in. And if you're in, we'll do open lines. Get your calls coming up next. We gave you the numbers. Everything you need, your time. Where are you going to take us next on Coast to Coast AM? This is Ian Punnett. All right, lots of open lines to get to. Bubba is in Lakewood, Colorado on Coast to Coast.
Yeah, this is Bubba, Scout, and Rev. There's three of us, but we're all in Lakewood, and we're the only ones of a white op. We're not black ops. We're white ops.
What does that mean?
Yeah, we got evidence through the Defense Intelligence Agency to the Judge Advocate General at the Pentagon, because we're a military jurisdiction in a JAG complaint at the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And we can harass the military until they get troops here. And you never hear anything about us three because we are against the local law enforcement. We got evidence that they work with terrorists. That's why the Defense Intelligence Agency stepped in and took our evidence when your FBI, who everybody's starting to hate, covered it up. And you never get to hear on enemy broadcasts in America that there's the victim side. You don't hear who they're arresting. You never hear from them. You only hear they have a press conference about the suspect they caught, and that's all you hear. You never hear the other side, and it's a crock. We found out firsthand because the Defense Intelligence Agency wanted the evidence that the FBI covered up for the local law. They tried to murder us, and we don't like that.
What did you do?
Nothing.
So wait. So they took three guys,
right?
And they said, we're going to kill these three guys for doing nothing.
Yeah, because they made up a false arrest. This happens every day in America.
What did they falsely accuse you of?
Well, we don't want to dignify their mouth, but it was.
Well, how am I going? You wanted all this time. What is it that you're falsely accused of?
Some kind of murder plot. That's what it was.
All right, so you're falsely accused of, and you're going. I can't verify anything, obviously, because you guys are using pseudonyms. But so you had three guys, and they decided these three guys, we're going to frame them.
You're exactly right.
And then we're going to kill them.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
And this came up out of nowhere because you guys were sitting around in a diner. How did it all start?
They don't like that I live in one residence, a single-family house. I don't live with anybody. The other two live in these apartments. The two codependent female, and They didn't like that we were together, and they started others.
How are you together if you're living in 3 different places?
Well, we meet with each other, and they knew all 3 of us were hanging around together.
Wait. Are you in a polygamous relationship?
No, we just hang around.
You're just friends.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get a scope on this. So 3 friends living in 3 different places, and okay, and they don't like that, so they decide that you have to die.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Because we didn't do anything wrong. They make stuff up. We telling you the truth.
I can only take your word for it because I have no details.
Links about
wait. I got to ask me. I don't care. Well, let me ask you a question. So they decided just one day, and so they came and they arrested you, and they said the charge is conspiracy to commit murder, or that they already said you did commit a murder. Which was it?
That kind of crap.
No. Which was it? Did you already? Are they accused you of committing a murder?
Yeah, and we were conspiring to do it.
Who was it that you?
No murder. There was no murder.
So who were you accused of conspiring to kill?
To tell you the truth, they didn't tell us. They made it up. I'm not kidding. And it went nowhere because they had no evidence. But what the prosecutor told the lawyer in the Jefferson County, famous for crimes and all sorts of garbage, they said, these people confessed. They told us we even confessed. And I said, what are they talking about? They had an audio tape with our voices confessing. I'm not kidding. We heard it ourselves. A former member of the Justice Department got it for us. His name was Ed O'Connor. He's famous in Colorado. He was a PI, but he used to work for the Justice Department. And, yeah, our voices were saying stuff that we never had a conversation. We know how.
So they faked your voices in a conspiracy.
Right. And we got that evidence, that audio tape, because we know what we're doing. And when the FBI, O'Connor said, take it to the FBI, only because we didn't want to do that. We know they cover things up, only so we had a record. Even through our 6th, 7th congressional district in Colorado, they took it. We said, take it to the U.S. Attorney General. And we didn't care where and behind our back, they took it to the main office in D.C. And it's signed by the deputy director of the FBI. We reviewed the tape. They didn't even.
And so they faked, because you all were friends living in 2 different places. They decided you had to die, so they faked a conspiracy by faking your voices on a tape, admitting to a conspiracy.
They've done other frame-ups, too. It's known it's called Eastern Kentucky University School of Criminal Justice. They do what they call case studies of people who've been murdered in Lakewood and Jefferson County, Colorado. And I didn't know about that, but we...
Okay, I will look into that. Now you're giving me something to look into. So Eastern Kentucky... They have a program looking into Lakewood, Colorado. Okay.
Yeah, they have books on it. One's called Introduction to Homicide, and it was printed by Nova Southeastern University Press.
Okay.
It's used in their school, and it's all about how this Colorado is a murder and cover-up capital. We know stuff about it.
Okay, wait. I will go look in that, and that'll give me something to go on. And then, so we'll leave it there for now, because I've got many other people who are hanging on, but it gives me something to start with, and I will look into it. And maybe, I mean, if what you're saying is true, that they just decided 3 people who are friends must die, then, and there's some sort of paper trail or some sort of legal paper trail on this, fascinating. We'll go from there. East of the Rockies, Mike is in Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin on Coast to Coast. Mike?
Hi, Ian. How are you tonight?
Good. Open lines. Where are you going to take us?
Well, your talk with Ric Prado was absolutely fascinating. I was in the U.S. Navy in the late 70s. My ship, I won't say which one, went to Cuba, Guantanamo Bay. At the time, they did not let us off of the base. What him and, a lot of people seem to forget about JFK's assassination was the CIA tried hundreds of times, literally, to eliminate Castro. Hundreds.
Right. Right.
And in the early 60s, we had intelligence assets in and near Cuba, which is, 90 miles from Key West. I mean, come on. So we have to cover our rear ends. Many of those people might be still alive, et cetera, et cetera,
But most of that information's out there. I mean, all of the failed plots, all of that's not the redacted stuff I'm worried. I mean, I get that. I'm not sure how, again, our CIA attempts to destabilize, Castro's Cuba and return it back to democracy. I'm not sure what that means to why they don't open up all of the files about JFK. Names here or there because somebody might still be alive in Cuba. That's fine, but that there are still too many pages that are unavailable. Thousands and thousands have been released, but for there to be any to be retained, I don't think I get it.
Well, the most important thing everybody seems to forget is the most important facts about the CIA, regardless of what they are, you and I will never, ever, ever know, period. Whether our assets are still alive or not, different operations, technology we had at the time, et cetera. Submarines off the coast. You and I are never going to know, ever, period. And number two, what nobody seems to mention is the biggest mobster in the country at the time, Carlos Marcello, has admitted to being behind the death of John Kennedy. And here's something else you probably never heard on Coast to Coast. Marcello was at the Ambassador Hotel the night that Bobby Kennedy was assassinated.
Oh, no. With all these mob connections have been well discussed. I mean, it's not just Marcello, it's Giancana, it's a lot of other people. The fact that the antipathy toward Bobby Kennedy is one thing, but again, I mean, I'm big on research, right? And I'm surprised we know a lot more than most people think we do because they're too busy holding on to their old preconceptions to actually do the heavy lifting and go do the research. So there are lots and lots of information that's available out there. And because they don't know it, they think no one's ever discussed it. When really it comes down to it is it's there. And if you really want to find out, there's plenty of it's in the public record. The larger question is, does the public care? And then you have to ask, well, if they don't, why? It's not because of the media. It's not because of anything. There's so many times you can put it out there, and if it doesn't get any traction, it just doesn't get any traction. But it still doesn't mean that it's not out there. So
right. People are essentially lazy. You should get Oliver Stone on your show sometime. Who made the movie JFK? He did his research thoroughly. He didn't accept fairy tales about Oswald. No.
Well, we'll leave it there for now. I mean, I think he would be the first to admit that he did a lot of research, but he also did things to make a better movie out of it. And so I just rewatched JFK 72 hours ago. And he does a lot of composite characters. He does a lot of things because you have to. You can't have a character. You can't have all of the. He does a Fletcher Prouty composite character in the guy that Donald Sutherland plays, and there's lots of things like that. You kind of have to do it to move the plot along. All right, so Joseph is in San Diego on Coast to Coast. Joseph.
Good evening, Ian. Wonderful show, as
Thank you.
Always.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Where are you going to take us?
Well, I have this theory about the CIA and the Nazis, and I need your opinion on it.
Sure.
After World War II, the OSS became the CIA.
Yep.
And then we brought in the war with Japan, we brought in highly qualified assets, scientists like Oppenheimer. They developed the bomb. And one of my theories is that a lot of the Nazi scientists were very educated from the Vedic literatures of India, and they understood the atom and how to split it. But I believe that bringing all these scientists in, these bad scientists with this certain mentality, basically has poisoned the intelligence services of the United States, including the CIA, the FBI and the Justice Department, but mostly like the CIA, because we know they're working all around the world as we speak to destabilize different countries.
Yeah. So I think you're referring to as Operation Paperclip, which we've talked about a lot on Coast to Coast, and something I find very interesting and kind of tragic. Thousands of German scientists, Nazis, committed Nazis, even though the CIA and others were complicit in trying to reform their bios and make them seem less menacing, making them seem like regular army types as opposed to Nazi types. Not really effective over time. We know now that was all nonsense. I don't know generationally whether that infection lasted. I think there was truth to the fact that we had them as kind of, if you'll pardon me borrowing the term, useful idiots. You know, these people wanted to live, and they wanted a lifestyle, and they didn't want to spend the rest of their life being chased around Germany, and they were afraid of retribution, both from the Nazis that were, you know, kind of the Odessa-file type Nazis, and then they didn't want to go to South America, and the U.S. presented an option where we gleaned their brains for things we wanted. They weren't operational within the CIA. They were operational within the intelligence community at large, mostly military intelligence. I don't know the answer to the question of whether that still is an infection that lasted very long. I think it was definitely there. Evidence would show that we were going so far out of our way to accommodate these Nazis who were responsible for, in many cases, horrible scientific experiments. Even the building of the rockets required the death of so many innocent people who were imprisoned, who were forced into the labor of these, you know, mountainsides. I just don't think it lasted very long. I don't see any evidence of it. I think it was there. I don't think it lasted. I think the bigger piece to that is the CIA, particularly in its roots as the OSS, was driven by this very waspy idea of what the country was supposed to be. And these affluent Ivy League white Anglo-Saxon Protestants that were in charge of the CIA for a long time, I think they did a ton of damage. And I think that attitude of the noblesse oblige, you know, that this was somehow this thing that they were called to do with their affluence or with their background or their connections, I think that's the embarrassing part, really, is we missed an opportunity to be much more global and to really truly be the leaders that we wanted to be. But we were focused on shaping a world into our image and likeness that didn't even exist in our own country. That's what I think. I can't guarantee any of that, but there's plenty of reasons to suggest that we should never have done Operation Paperclip. Going to the moon first didn't justify it. Nuclear things are a little different. But I just don't think it lasted beyond, say, the 60s. The influence, I think, waned. Hopefully, anyway. I'd like to think I'm right. It would scare me to think that you're right. Frank is in Salt Lake City on Coast to Coast. Do we lose him because I talk too much? Or we're out of time? So we have Frank then to lead off coming up in our last hour of Open Lines. Doug, Laura, Larry, and we got a couple other lines that aren't ringing and aren't on hold right now. So that means an opportunity for you. Don't know the numbers? You don't need them. You can always get them from the website, but we like to repeat them anyway because, you know, we all like the sound of that guy's voice. Coming up next on Coast to Coast AM, this is So it's been fun tonight, open lines being what they are. A guy named Ace from Buffalo has called a couple of times and then hung up before we get to him. If he can hang on, he'll be up first for open lines next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Open Lines is that chance every week where you get to take a few minutes on the air and talk about something that perhaps you haven't heard anybody bring up before. And I don't really know where people are going. I just see names and where they're from. And so Ace is from Buffalo. And obviously Buffalo, New York has been very much on the minds of most Americans, even though the game was in Cincinnati. It was hard to watch and know, too, the pain that both the Buffalo Bills team organization and what the fans were going through in Buffalo. But it looks like Damar Hamlin is coming out of it, and that's pretty good news. So, Ace, thanks for hanging on, and thanks for calling back. Our thoughts are with you.
Thanks for having me, Ian. The reason I wanted to call was to piggyback off of Project MK Ultra that was made possible from Operation Paperclip. I am a targeted individual. Project MK Ultra has never stopped. The CIA came out and said they stopped it in the 1970s. How Shooters Are Made is a program I am in.
I don't know what that. How
Active Shooters Are Made is a program that I am in.
How Active Shooters Are Made is a program that you are in.
It's an off branch of MK Ultra.
And that you are being trained to become an active shooter.
I was my whole life. There was a rumor going around in my school that I was going to shoot up the school due to a friend's death. And I was going to make a hit list and was going to shoot up the jocks at the school I was at.
Okay.
This was before Columbine.
Why are you still in this program?
There's different off branches to Project MK Ultra. There's different types of MK Ultra.
I don't care. Why are you involved in any way with a program where you would end up shooting people?
Because that's how shooters are made. This is against my will. This is against our will. Target individuals around the world.
How could you be against your will and you're calling a radio show?
It is my will that I'm calling. The D.C. Navy Yard shooter, Aaron Alexis, when he carved on his weapon, this is my ELF weapon. It stands for extremely low frequencies.
Okay, but I'm talking about you. So why are you still involved in this program? Why haven't you taken all of the evidence? Why haven't you taken all of your connections and blown the lid off this thing? If this is true, and we're just two guys on a phone, but if this is true and everything you're saying is 100% verifiable, why are you still involved? And what's the profit other than in becoming complicit in being a merchant of death for innocent people?
I've been trying to expose this for a very long time. I went down to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Buffalo, New York, to have this exposed with two agents named Randy and Mike.
Okay, but they fine. You got two boneheads in the FBI. What is it? I mean, if you've got what kind of evidence do you have that this is true?
I have X-ray evidence of a chip in my leg. I network with a former NSA whistleblower, Karen Melton Stewart, Kirk.
I don't know these names, so I can't verify. When you start doing last names, we can't do that. So, but let me ask you, what have you, if you've got evidence,
absolutely,
and you've gone to, have you gone to a local university? Have you talked to investigative reporters? Have you showed them, and you say, I will go undercover. I'll wear a wire to the next meeting of this thing where they're teaching you, forcing you to become an active shooter?
It's all done through subliminal messages, so ELF, which is extremely low frequencies. It's called V2K, which is done with first operation and Desert Storm was when the Marines went up against I think it was like 1,000 Iraqi soldiers. They used S-Squad.
But I'm asking about you. I'm asking about you. So you're saying your messages come to you ultra low frequency so that there is no evidence
ELF.
of them receiving these messages?
That's ELF, extremely low frequencies.
Yeah, that's what I just said. So, fine. So what is it that you're saying that they send you these messages saying you need to go do this thing, and this is, you believe, the CIA that's doing it?
It's done through Fusion Centers, COINTELPRO Group, Project Monarch, Project Reborn. It's done through all of it. This is how active shooters are made.
Okay. You and I are going to disagree on that. I'm not saying that. Wait. You and I are going to disagree that active shooters are made because they're pinpointed by the CIA and they're made turned into robots and shooting machines and whatever. I don't believe that. But I'm going to put that aside for now. I'm more worried about you. If that's what you're being made, if this is your experience, then I think you have a moral obligation to do more to be stopped before you become the active shooter. Because you're saying in high school was the first time that you were accused of this. How old are you now?
I'm now 40 years old. I'll be 41.
Okay, so how come you haven't shot up anything yet?
Because I'm a Christian. By the grace of God, I'm not doing what they want to do. It's because of Christ that I'm able to.
So you're able to, through prayer, you're able to resist
Absolutely.
these ultra low frequency things. Have you? Are you out there with that message to other people that you believe are being instructed by the CIA to become active shooters to say, use religion to keep away those messages?
To use the name of Yahshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ, absolutely. I have a target individual group. I have a private group that's been deemed as a terrorist organization legally, and I had to legally deem it as a 3%er group, as a militia group. It's called TINWO Resistance 1776 on Facebook.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. I'll go take a look. Appreciate the heads up. I'm glad you're not doing it. I'm glad that you are resisting it, and that if this is what's happening to you, that people are getting through to you with these messages, that you're getting the help that you need, and that you're helping other people in the process. We'll go to John, who's in Toronto on the international line on Coast to Coast. John?
You got me on Toronto, and I'm talking to you. And, you know, there are certain things that I really don't like about what your whole system is doing towards the war with Russia. And you guys, you're just taking one step at a time and going and saying, well, we'll help him. But what Putin is doing is running you into the ground, because he will grind everybody down. But you know what? Who's dying? It's the Ukrainians.
Well, hopefully there's fewer of them. I have friends in Ukraine who report that they're very grateful for the support. They, of course, want more, and I understand that. Our response is judicious, and it frustrates me sometimes, too. I don't think I understand the full picture often. Appreciate your thoughts from Canada. I have long had a nickname for Canada, which is America's Hall Monitor, and I realize that you follow us much more closely than we follow you. So thank you for that thought, and I hope that we aren't playing into Putin's hands, and in fact we can do more good than we do bad in the years ahead. And I would look forward to the day when I can visit my friends in Ukraine. First time caller line, Doug is in Nashville on Coast to Coast. Doug?
Hello, Ian. How are you?
Good. Where are you going to take us?
Well, you know, it's kind of embarrassing, but this really did happen. But me and my wife used to run a husband and wife team, and we went all 48 states and stuff. And this was back in 1990, 91. And we was in West Texas. We was on 10 or 20. You know, whenever you leave El Paso and you're going east.
Yep, and, I know it.
Okay, there's a split. You know, you go up, and I can't remember. And I don't know if it was before the split or after the split on 20. But because I was going to get on 20 and, you know, go, because we was going east coast. But anyway, like 2:30 in the morning, and I'm driving along. I'm listening to Tarzan on the radio, you know, because this is back in the 90s, you know. I had books on CD, you know. And it's dark. I mean, there's no moon. It's pitch black, and all I see is just my headlights in front of me, just my, you know, beam of headlights, right?
Right.
And this pterodactyl I know it sounds stupid. It sounds unbelievable, but it happened. This floated right across my headlights, and it sucked his wings in and, brought him out, and it flapped just like a bat does. They kind of brought him in, brought him out one time, and it was so large that when its beak was on the left side of the road, like where the road would stop at, and it would go to the sand, because I was in the desert out there, right? And the tail was over the shoulder. It was that long. It crossed both lanes in the shoulder as it, just went across, and it was right in front of me. I had my brights on, of course, so it was maybe 100 feet in front of me when it did it.
Right.
It was that close. And I've never been so scared in my life. It flipped me out.
Well, we've had this conversation on Coast to Coast. You know that there's ongoing research in, depending on who you talk to culturally, some people call them thunderbirds. Some people are saying they're cryptozoological remnants, like a kind of pterodactyl, like a pterodon or something like that. And I know that South Texas is where that sort of thing is seen more often, but that's not too far from what you're talking about. You're right. You're El Paso. You're West Texas, right? If that's where sighting took place. It's where the mountains. Yeah, no, I totally get it. South of New Mexico, right?
Yeah.
That's like ski territory up there. Those mountains are so big. So I'm with you. I mean, I think that this is, and when we've talked about this before. What's interesting about this is perspective, and that things that other people can look at, and depending on what their line of sight is and what their frame of reference is, things that are big can look small. Right? Like a jet in the sky can look like a starling if it's up high enough and you're not expecting it to. And things that are small can look big depending on how close it was to us. So, yeah, dude, I wish I could give you more information other than if you go online and look for it, there are books on these modern sightings of flying monsters. And it had the head, because I was, within 100, 125 feet of it, 150 at the most. Sure.
I wasn't very far from it when it went across, And, it was probably, I was in a cab over because it's 1990, cab overs were prevalent back then, and it was probably just tall enough, high enough in the air where I would go over it, where I would go under it. It was up, but it was low on the ground. And it didn't have feathers. It looked just like what they show in those books. It was the real deal. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it flipped me out.
I totally get it. So, but let me also be clear about some other things that. So, birds that do have feathers can still have very closely cropped feathers that don't necessarily show up, or right. And just to make the point, pelicans have the same shaped heads, right? They make the point at the end of Jurassic Park. So there's a physical formation that's very familiar. Now, could it have been, and this is what some people claim, against cryptozoological appearances? They'll say, well, this is a diseased bird. This is a regular bird, a big giant pelican that has lost a lot of its feathers, like a dog has mange or something like that. Well, I'm with you, but
you're not going to convince me of anything.
I'm not trying to. What I'm saying is,
I know. I mean, I get that, but it looked leathery.
Yeah,
it was brown.
Right.
That color. It was the wings were thin. They weren't thick.
Right.
I mean,
they were translucent. You could see through the skin of the.
No, you couldn't see through them.
Okay.
No.
Well, that's interesting.
But I could see the bone. Where the they're kind of, elbowy.
Right.
I guess that'd be the best way for me to explain it. But it was freaky. It was,
well,
it's one of those things that when you see it, you remember it for the rest of your life. Because, like I said, that was what 30.
Yeah, I hope I do.
Ago anyway. Yeah,
and there was a rash of sightings of those things about 30 years ago too. So it might be time to revisit that subject on Coast to Coast. I'll put in a reminder, see what we've got, see who's doing new stuff on it. Laura's in Mesa, Arizona, on Coast to Coast AM, and we've got time for her before the bottom of the hour. Laura?
Hey, Ian. Thanks for taking my call. Listen, I was raised in the Bible Belt, but yet I never really had any access to a Bible, so I was hoping you could maybe help me interpret a vision that I had back in the early 90s. It was of a bunch of angels that were coming down to earth for like a big event, and when I asked them, what are you here for, one of the angels pointed over to my left, and when I looked, I saw a bride, and she was all ready and waiting for her groom to appear, and I felt that the groom was Jesus, but yet I'm wondering who was the bride. And why is the ceremony reversed? Like in our culture, we have the groom waiting for the bride, and so I'm just wondering what your take is on that, and also on the second coming of Christ, what your take is on that and how that looks like to you.
Well, I think that we get into some very prolonged conversations that we wouldn't be able to settle adequately in the time we have. However, there's a famous parable of the 10 virgins and the groom. There are stories about angels in collective, but mostly angels don't appear in groups in the Bible. Angels are considered to be sort of a divine extension, and that would be an unusual biblical reference, but that doesn't mean that wasn't what your vision was. So what did you feel that the vision was trying to tell you? What did you feel about it?
Well, when I saw the angels coming down to heaven, it was like I saw different levels, and I felt like each of the levels had a role, and they all had different jobs, and it was like ascending from God all the way down to earth. And then when I saw them coming down, like it was like a cloud formation, like I literally saw a cloud formation, and it was like I could see them coming down to earth, and when I was like, what are you guys here for? And they're like a big event, and then the one angel was pointing over to the left, and that's when I saw a bride ready and waiting for her groom to appear, and I felt like the groom was Jesus, but I'm wondering who was the bride. And then years later, it dawned on me, I'm like, wait a minute, in our ceremony, we have the groom waiting for the bride to appear, so I was wondering why is it reversed and what that represents, because I think I found something in the Bible that said that this, like the coming was like a bride ready and adorned waiting for her groom to appear.
Right.
And I was just wondering what that means, because I don't know anything about the Bible.
The hierarchy of angel stuff is a non-biblical assertion. So, there's an angelic council, so to speak, but there's nothing about the way. I think we're looking at like an early Middle Ages invention, this idea of a celestial hierarchy, which kind of fits along a military model, or like in It's a Wonderful Life, right, where Clarence is trying to get his wings or whatever. So, but I don't know. I think it's always more interesting to think, what did we feel about it afterward, and not try to find some other way to explain it. Maybe that's what your subconscious was trying to tell you. Maybe that's what the divine was trying to tell you. Have to leave that there. We got half-hour open lines coming up next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. All right, so open lines, last half hour, it's been kind of action-packed, hasn't it? Lots of different things coming in from different places and various subjects, and we'll find out where you're going to take us coming up on Coast to Coast AM. Larry is in Florida, where I'm heading coming up sometime later on this spring to see my dear old mother. Larry, on a wild card line, open lines, where are you going to take us?
Well, this isn't the reason why I called, but you mentioned you're a prog rock fan, and I'm actually from Nashville, and we're down here doing a mini tour with 2 prog rock bands from Nashville.
Tell me about that. I want to know all about that.
Well, my wife and I have a little podcast and a promotion company, and
what's your podcast?
Music City Metal.
Cool.
We're trying to get the word out there that Nashville is a lot bigger than country music.
Hey, you know, I was the morning guy at 103 KDF for many years.
Oh, wow. No kidding.
I replaced Carl P. when he left.
Wow.
And so I did it with my buddy, the Duke, until I went to WGN in Chicago. And so when I hear things like Queensryche or when we're talking about Enter Sandman, I can picture myself in the studios at 103 KDF popping those CDs on as they came in through the mail, and they're just like totally loving it. I'm a big fan of metal. So, so you have this little podcast. That's cool. Congratulations on that.
Yeah, it's fun, and just to get the interesting to see the young metal bands and how they these young 23, 25-year-old kids. Have 40, 50 years of music that they're mulling together.
Sure.
And the new sounds that are coming out are really interesting. The bands that we have here are very Dream Theater-esque style bands.
Which is okay. I used to go to 328 all the time.
Oh, wow, no kidding.
And I would see the bands that were coming through, and I would see some of the hip-hop bands. I saw Ice-T at 328. I saw...
I don't even think that's there anymore.
I was going to ask. And then you go to the Bluebird and you see somebody like a John Hyatt or something. Mm-hmm. It was cool. I love Nashville. It was a great place.
Oh, I love it too. Yeah, we love it as well. And sadly, though, the indie, the kind of independent venues are disappearing.
I bet.
Some of the big names are swooping in. But the reason why I called is I have you ever heard of alpha-gal syndrome?
No.
So August of 2020, I was bit by a Lone Star tick. About 10 days later, I got very sick.
Oh, gosh.
Developed Rocky Mountain spotted fever.
Oh.
And immediately was treated for Lyme disease, and until that blood test comes back, it's the wrong antibiotic. I got very sick.
Right.
But once they figured it out, I was treated. And, a year of COVID, I was one of 2,000 cases. But as things, after that went away, I just felt like I never got better. I was sick every day, nauseous, dizzy, sweating, hives, rash, all these this very bizarre thing. And about 2 months go by, and I happenstance talking to a friend, and he said, man, you should look up the meat allergy that you can get from a tick bite.
Oh, interesting.
And, of course, I ran right to my computer. And he's like, call your doctor. So I did, went to my doctor. My doctor never heard of it. She's like, I'll send you to an allergist, and they'll get to the bottom of it. As it turns out, my allergist himself had the disease. And what it is it's a bacteria that gets in from the tick that causes you to have your body attack itself when you consume anything mammalian. Now, it's horrible. I had to give, and the only treatment is avoidance.
Yeah.
And that was easy. Giving up the meat, I miss pork, I miss bacon, all that. But the real problem exists is with medications. 80% of pills, capsules, either have gelatin, they either have magnesium stearate. I can't use certain lotions that have lanolin in it.
Oh, yeah.
And what's very interesting is
that's just really interesting.
First trip that I had to the doctor, and he was describing it to me. He's like, yeah, well, we're going to do a test. And he's like, there's this little thing floating around that this was an engineered disease. And I just bought into it. I'm like, oh, man, I listened to Coast to Coast, and they did this whole show about Lyme, and, blah, blah, blah. I've been trying to get a hold of them to get the word out, and he just immediately backpedaled. And he said, yeah, it's just a theory, though. And as soon as I kind of bought into it and started talking about the whole thing, he just totally backed away from it. But I would highly recommend you looking into it and doing a show on it. Because they estimate that there's 1 million or 2 people that have this and don't know it. And they're sick all the time, and they're getting that doctors like my primary doctor did not know about it. And, they get treated for Crohn's disease or colitis or, something like that. And recently another bandmate, a band that Mary and I, my wife and I have been working with, young man, 25 years old, family, lost his job, sick, going to the ER all the time. And we were together, and I'm like, man, your symptoms sound like mine. You should. And as it turns out, he went and got checked out. He had it for 1 year. not knowing, consuming meat, even smelling bacon, Ian, I can be, the alpha galactose enzyme is in the grease in the air. So if I get a strong smell of bacon, I have to go take Benadryl, take Zofran, take a shot of my.
Ugh, I hate Benadryl.
Inhaler. Oh yeah, then your knuckles are dragging on the ground. And I do carry an EpiPen now. I've never had to use the EpiPen. Generally, those light treatments work, but
that's really interesting. I will look into this, and I appreciate that, and I want to kind of get some other people on. But I will tell you, I gave up meat about 2 years ago because I didn't want to go on. I'm just getting older, and my cholesterol was like flirting with this or that. So I gave it up. I use a lot of Impossible when I can, and I just cook vegetarian. It's not by principle. I just was trying to lower all of my stuff naturally, so I work out more and whatever. But I will say, every so once in a while something will have a piece of like some meat broth or something like that. I think my body has become sort of resistant to it. Not eating it regularly, I can kind of feel it. And so I've been wondering whether even just myself I've developed some sort of meat allergy, because I have a weird kind of, it feels like it's not psychosomatic. Alpha galactose enzyme, I'm going to look into that. Sorry you're going through that. Pleasure to talk to somebody else from the Nash, and who also knows that Music City means more than just Lower Broad or Opryland, and that there's some cool stuff on the Rock Block and on Demumbrian, and I hope that'll always be the case, because that was the beauty of Nashville when I lived there. We'll go to AJ in Logan, Utah, on Coast to Coast. AJ?
Hey, how's it going, man?
Hey, good. You got open lines. Go ahead.
Heck yeah, man. Hey, so I've just really loved what you've been saying tonight, especially the last guy about the Lyme disease thing.
Fascinating.
What I wanted to ask you is, what I've been thinking is, so like, how like you have all these correlating stories of like the Bible. Every major religion has some correlation within it.
Venn diagram of overlap. Yep.
I'm thinking that maybe 12,000 years ago, perhaps we got wiped out. Big cataclysm happened. The Great Flood, and I think that perhaps maybe our history did get erased, and that's why the mystery of the pyramids and all this is just such a great mystery to us. And I think maybe perhaps that's not even the first time that. Earth history is very, very long, and I just wonder what you think about that. And yeah, that's about it.
Well, okay, but let's define our terms. The pyramids aren't that old,
right?
So if you're talking about the flood. This is a really interesting question. So is there some sort of sense memory that people have, or that there had been some sort of inherited folk oral tales that were passed along about the time when the earth was covered in water, or there'd been a massive flood? That's entirely possible. I don't think it has anything to do with Egypt, but I do think that there are. No. I'm just going with it. I have to be specific, because that's just who I am.
Right. Thank you.
So, no problem. So, I think that it will always be true. Could there have been other cultures that were erased by a flood? Entirely possible. The archaeological or anthropological record would suggest maybe not. That maybe some of our physical sophistication came, again, closer to the development of something like the pyramids than we're willing to admit. And that as hominids, we had no history to erase. We were much more animalistic, in our culture and our fundamental culture. Maybe not. And there's a lot of people that, in an Atlantean sort of way or whatever, they believe that there were these very sophisticated cultures that got wiped out. I guess we can't know, but
Right.
It's an interesting question.
Yeah, and exactly. We definitely can't know. But you've heard of like Göbekli Tepe and some of these other megalithic structures that far outdate what we even thought was, the archaeological model of I forgot what it's called. It's the archaeological model of, I forgot what it's called. Anyway.
Well, fair enough. Then let's just do this. Let's just say, yes, megalithic stones that were humanly placed and are very much a curiosity. There are literally thousands of them around the world, and we've talked about them on coast. I think that is an ongoing subject, and I think this is worthy of reconsideration. So the good news is that academia puts a lot of money in research, surprisingly more than people realize. So it's all not people telling the same story over again. I watch TV shows on History Channel, and
it's the Clovis model that I was.
Yeah, the Clovis. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. So I mean, I'm just saying, there's a lot of people doing original stuff, and it's just not all derivative. And I'm always interested in original. So we'll have to leave that there for now. I got to squeeze in some other people. Sorry, AJ. Chris is holding on in Milwaukee on Coast to Coast, east of the Rockies. Chris?
Hey, Ian. How you doing?
Good. Try to make time for you. Go ahead.
Yeah. All right. I'll be quick. Hey, so I just want to talk about a UFO experience I had about, 18 years ago. So, long-time listener. Me and my buddies used to drive around after work and listen to Coast. And we went up to Port Washington, about 30 minutes north of Milwaukee.
Home of Allen Edmonds shoes. The Allen Edmonds factory is in Port Washington, Wisconsin.
That is true. They have a big outlet sale there.
I'm a big fan of Allen Edmonds shoes, so I know.
They make a fine piece of footwear.
They do.
They do. But no, we went out there, and there's a breakwater out there in the lighthouse. We used to go out there and just, college, late high school, we'd muck around and go on the breakwater, climb the lighthouse. Probably not supposed to. But we went out there one time after work. We used to work until about midnight, and so there's four of us, and we saw five. They were UFOs. I mean, there's no other way to describe them. They were sort of a reddish-orange color, doing aerial stuff that nothing else could do. There were no drones at the time, so, I mean, it was pretty clear.
I'm with you.
Tried calling the coast. Couldn't get through because, no cell coverage on the water there. Long story short, one of my buddies tries filming them. And I say tried because he clearly was filming on his little dinky flip phone at the time.
Right.
And clearly had it in they were on the screen, right, as he's filming. So we get back to the vehicle after the whole thing. There's nothing. It's just the sky on the camera. And we're like, what? Okay, bizarre, right, whatever. So we all talked about this for years, it's just kind of a thing. And then, eventually kind of parted ways. So at a bachelor party about 4 years ago, we're all back together and stuff. Me and the bachelor remember this distinctly. One of the other guys remembers it, doesn't remember the filming. And then the guy who actually did the filming has no recollection of it even happening at all. And it got me thinking about sort of like consensus reality and this idea of like, is it possible that a lot of these sort of like Fortean or like high strangeness things occur somewhere outside of like objective truth, like the Newtonian model of like the universe, not like another reality.
No, I think this is very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of has implications, I think, for like religion, mysticism, everything. Right? Is it possible that, in some way, a lot of these things that we sort of just call the paranormal are actually just something that exists outside of like sort of the Newtonian model, right?
Well, if you look at it in terms of just even the name, para just means around normal. So if you're talking about it being around that, it's almost like a synonym. I'll give you another theory. I don't how this informs it, but I do think there's a lot of people who don't have the brain capacity or the inclination to retain memory.
Yeah. Yes. I have definitely come across that.
Yeah, and you could have the same experience. You don't remember when we got shot at? Nope. And like, what? What are you talking? It's like a significant event in my life. Nope. Don't remember that at all. I were there. I don't remember that. I have a photograph. I don't think it was me. I mean, it's really weird to me how some people are just wired like that. Their brains are wired to forget. Yeah. And I think that there's been some anthropological evidence that said this is... it speaks to a development that some people have, a genetic development that other people don't have, the ability to retain the past. And I will say this, and maybe you agree with me. There are things I know I did and said yesterday to my wife, which she has no memory of whatsoever. It's like wiped out. It's like, no, I said to you yesterday. Nope, never happened. So maybe it's the same thing. Love that story, though, Chris. That's really interesting. And I strongly encourage people to go see that episode of Unsolved Mysteries. It's on Netflix right now where they talk about the Lake Michigan UFOs. I'm telling you, there's a lot of activity. Lights in the sky over Lake Michigan. Well, over all the Great Lakes, for that matter. All right, so this will have to hold us for a week. I'll be back next week, Friday and Saturday, 2 big shows coming up. You guys were rock stars on the phones tonight. Thank you so much for making open lines happen. And enjoy a better, peaceful weekend, warmer weather on the way. Deus te amat, and I do too.